Hey, good morning, everybody. Welcome to the workshop today on the CAR forms. How is everybody?
Okay.
I'd like to get some.
Hello.
Hi, welcome. I'd like to get some feedback. We've got a small group today as to which forms you're interested in, or if maybe one more so over another. But first, I want to show you where you can access our booklet. Normally, when we have these workshops live, I would hand them out, but we have these booklets on our website. So Danny will show you when you go right to our homepage, right? This is all familiar to everybody. Just click on that agent login up there at the top right. When you click on that, what's the password?
Sold.
Yeah, sold. Thank you. And this will bring up most of the material that we go through on these workshops. And if you go down to the Zip Forms booklet, it's almost near the bottom, and click on that. That will pull up this. You get an option here. You can actually do the RPA, the purchase agreement, and the zip form booklets. So, I used to do this booklet because it has the purchase agreement, it has the RPA in it also, but it's about a 3 to 4 hour class. So I do a separate workshop for just the purchase agreement. And today we're going to go through most of the disclosures, and my goal is to keep this within the hour here, so that I don't want Dan falling asleep on me. Oh, I got a smile. Good to see you, Dan. Okay, so this is the I'm hoping that all of you guys have seen this before. This is the zip form booklet. It's only $99. The next page here is our table of contents, and if we could focus on this, I've split this up between buyer papers, seller papers, and both buyer and seller papers. And then we have a copy of the closing checklist on the back. And that closing checklist list is actually, I think it's an older one. So that has not been updated. The one that you'll find in the office and separately online is a more recent one. It has the PED forms, and there's a couple other disclosures that have been introduced since last year. And again, this, if you look at the revision date on that bottom left there, this is from March of last year. Most of the forms have not changed. The purchase agreement, by the way, we were supposed to have a new one as of December of last year, by the end of 2020, but this pandemic kind of messed things up. I've been working on a draft. In fact, we even have our Lumlow continuing education booklet in review now by the DRE to be approved for our continuing education, and it has the draft of the new RPA in it. We worked on that a year ago because it was supposed to have been out by now. The new booklet is, the new RPA is anywhere from 16 to 18 pages. I think they've cut it down. The draft that we worked on was actually 18 pages. And when Gov Hutchinson spoke last week, he said it was, I think, 16 pages. So we'll be reviewing that when it comes out. It'll probably be the end of this year for the purchase agreement. The good thing about the new purchase agreement is it really hasn't changed anything. It's mainly structuring all of the terms. So you're going to get a couple of pages in the beginning where an agent will put the terms of the purchase, the down payment, the deposit, the loan amount. And so there's a couple of pages where it looks like an Excel sheet with all of the numbers. And it's actually a little more easier for a new agent to go through. The clauses, almost everything for the terms that are in the current RPA are the same. There hasn't been that much change in it. But that's a separate class. So today we're going to do these disclosures. And just so that you know, as I mentioned at our office meeting a couple months ago, the Department of Real Estate only requires 4 disclosure forms in a packet, in our transaction packet when we close. One is the NHD for the natural hazards disclosure. The other is the TDS, the transfer disclosure statement. You're all familiar with that. The lead-based paint is the third required, and then the fourth required form, which is brand new as of this year, is the HHDA. That's the Home Hardening Disclosure Advisory. That's for the high fire zone. And that is only required when the property is in a high or very high fire zone. And the only ones that I know of around here are in Palos Verdes. There's a couple areas that are in that high fire zone. But all the other properties in the South Bay, it's not needed. It's not a required form. So those 4 forms are what is required in disclosures by the state. Now, obviously, we have 100+ pages of disclosures that go into our transaction folder. And I'm sure you realize that the seller property questionnaire is a very important form, whether you're representing the buyer or the seller, because you want that seller to go through all of those items. The AVID, where the agent does that visual inspection, that's an addendum to the TDS. All the brokers that I know of require that, but it's not a Department of Real Estate required form. So there's lots of forms, as we'll talk about today, that I think are very important, but they're not required forms. Okay, so this is what we have in front of us today to review. Any comments as to anything on here that you would like me to maybe
Is
spend?
the checklist on another form inside our list there? I mean, I know the checklist is updated. Is this an updated checklist?
This was updated as of last year. For example, there's lots of forms on here that we don't have. I don't have the fire form on here because it's rarely used. We don't have any of the lease forms, if you're leasing properties. I don't have any of the income property forms. We just have the regular residential purchase agreement. So this is set up mainly for your typical single family residence sale.
Mm-hmm.
The PED forms, the disclosures, to enter the property that are required now. Hopefully that's going to go away here by the end of the year. That's not part of this table of contents either.
Okay, thank you.
Is there a topic though that you're interested in any of these?
No, I just was wondering, right, what like you indicated, the forms that are not in this booklet.
Yeah, so there's, as you go down that, when you're on zip forms and you go down that list of forms, I'm guessing there's at least a couple hundred different forms that they have. Even counter offers and the buyer representation agreement. We'll talk on that. There's 3 different buyer representation agreements, and I just have what I consider the least offensive. The easiest one for our agents to use is the BRNN. That's the one that's not for compensation, for the buyer representation form. But we'll get into that. So I'm hoping any requests that you guys have.
I'm good.
Yes. Okay.
No, I'm fine.
Do you know who that is? Oh, everybody's fine? Okay. All right. So Most of you have done transactions, so I'm just kind of gloss over some of this. One thing that's changed over the last couple of years on the agency, if you remember, the closing file required 3 agency forms. Now it's just 2, so it makes more sense. One, it's from the buyer, and one's from the seller. So it doesn't matter which side you're representing. We want copies from the listing agent and from the selling agent of their agency disclosure. And the only difference, as you know, is what I put in the stars up here, and it tells you which way they go. But the body of the agency form is the same, whether it's for the buyer or the seller. You just check the boxes down there. These are all the same form. The back page gives you the actual civil code of this, so there's nothing that you fill in on this page. This was one way in my over the years, CAR did not write in "do not complete sample only" in the middle there, because what they're doing here is copying the civil code as to what the California requires for a disclosure. And so they require that agency format to be like that. And so I was seeing agents actually filling this in on this back page. So to me, and then CAR in its infinite wisdom came back and they wrote on this, "do not complete sample only" in the center here. But I always got a kick out of agents that filled that out. I obviously knew that they did not have much training when they actually filled out part of that civil code statement.
Now the RPA has that exact format.
Yeah, and the purchase agreement on the new RPA is exactly like that, and our existing RPA. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about the buyer representation agreement. Again, as you'll hear a couple times today, probably one of the most important forms in here. We would never list a property to sell on a listing agreement without taking a listing. I mean, you're not going to go put a sign on a property. You're not going to start marketing a property for sale without getting a listing agreement. But there's still a lot of agents out there that represent buyers without doing this buyer representation agreement. And then, it's more rare now than it used to be, but then I'll get agents that say, "Oh, I've been working with this agent for a year and they went off and they bought a house without me." And it's like, well, you didn't have a representation agreement. So it's very important, use this. There's 3 different buyer representation agreements on zip forms. The other 2 actually list a commission amount that the buyer is going to pay you. This one basically states that you're going to get paid by the seller on this. But the important thing that this form has is on the second page at the very bottom here, I think it's number 5E, 5E as in Edward. It says the buyer represents that the buyer has not entered into an exclusive representation agreement with another broker. So when you work with a buyer and you have them pre-approved by your lender, and you sit down with them to discuss the type of properties that they're going to be looking for, I would fill on the first page of this, I would put some notes as to, I think this one states, you can go back a page, Danny, this states $700,000 or $800,000 in the South Bay, right there under number 1. And you're going to go through your buyer representation agreement and your buyer checklist. And that's what I teach in my working with buyer workshop. And you will go through that and have them sign this form along with an agency form. As you know, that agency form needs to be signed prior to your client signing any paperwork. So that's your first form. And then if it's a buyer, hopefully this is your next form. So any questions on this buyer representation agreement? Any comments as to why a lot of agents don't use this form? Okay, not hearing any. Let's move on. Buyer inspection advisory. I'm not going to go through this, just read it. One of the things, this kind of covers everything that a buyer needs to be aware of. And it's to protect us and the brokerage by saying, hey, don't look to us about square footage or any of the facts on the building. Square footage, for example, there's a new form that came out that actually lists, and that's, I think, just from last year, Danny, right? We were working on that committee. Just from last year, that lists the different sources of square footage. As we know, typically we always put the assessor records because that's on the listing form and that's one of the options. But a lot of times you'll have a seller that says, oh, gee, I had an appraisal done and it says it's this amount, or I taped it and it's this amount, or the previous agent said that. So you can list all the different square footages on this form, and that way it's full disclosure to that buyer. And I think that's a good form if, in fact, you have discrepancies in your square footage. If everybody's saying it's 1,200 square feet, then I wouldn't use it. It's not that important. But it is if there's a difference in these different agencies and their reporting. So read through this. It's a disclosure. A couple things, as you'll see in a lot of these disclosures, it basically says, hey, don't blame us. The problem is it's just like the big case that was the Coldwell Banker a couple of years ago, where the flyer that the agent was using was off, I think 10,000 square feet on this Beverly Hills home, and there was a big lawsuit that went on for about, I think it was 5 years. Even though we give our clients all of these disclosures that you should be checking everything yourself, the problem is that clients can still sue us if they're not happy or don't feel that they were being represented properly. In this form, this is one of my favorite forms, the BIE, the Buyer's Inspection Elections. A lot of brokers don't require this to be done. And so sometimes I have a problem when I'm representing a seller to get the buyer to sign this. But I think this is probably one of the most important forms because what it does is it puts this list of items that the buyer can inspect in front of the face of the buyer, and he has to sign this. And as we know, 9 times out of 10, a buyer is just going to do a home inspection and maybe a termite inspection, and that's about it. So this actually confirms that the buyer has seen this. There's 42 or 37 different things that they could be checking for: methane gas, asbestos, formaldehyde, radon gas. In my 300 years of doing real estate, I've never had a client ask to do a radon gas check. But you can imagine if a problem comes up later, whether it's a lead-based paint or on the sewer, if they didn't get the sewer scoped, this is an important form because not only did the buyer have the right to do all of these inspections during their inspection period, but we gave them this list right in front of them and gave them the option to get the sewer system checked out or the fireplace, whatever. And they've signed this saying, nope, this is all we're getting. So I think this is a very important form and to protect you and the brokerage. And it also educates the client, the buyer, on a lot of different inspections that they could be part of if requested at their expense to do. All right, let's move on here.
I can hear you.
All right, so we're getting into the seller's papers here. Let's move down. We've got the same agency form, except this is the seller signs this. Let's move down. Civil code, the listing agreement. Okay, so if you haven't heard my pitch on these listing agreements, this is how I recommend that they be filled out. You'll notice under number 2 here, under 2B, I put seller may cancel at any time. And I use that guarantee in my listing presentation. So you'll hear that if you haven't already. In my working with sellers presentation, I always close all of my listing presentations with potential sellers by giving them a guarantee that I guarantee them hardworking, ethical service, or they can cancel at any time. This is, I think it's very important if you're going up against other agents. Why would you list your house with party A if they're not offering this guarantee and party B is offering it? So I think it's very important. I know a lot of agents, even in our company, that if they're only working, their referrals or family members, this probably is not that important. But if you're competing against other agents, this puts you ahead above everybody else. And there's a few agents in our company that don't use this, and I keep pushing them to use it. And so I cross out this number 2 and number 3. That's the safety clause on number 2 and number 3. If you read, especially under number 3 here, it says if the property is withdrawn from sale, basically for any reason, then the seller owes the brokerage 5% commission. And it's probably been, well, maybe 25, 30 years that I've been doing this guarantee. I had an attorney that I listed a property for, and he goes, well, I'm not going to agree to this. If something happens to him, he's still going to have to pay the 6% commission. And it's like, well, okay. So I cross that out. So use it to your advantage. Use it in your seller listing presentation so that when you can close on these listings, it's a win-win for everybody. And there's really no reason why that why that seller would not list for you. The other great thing about using that guarantee is that you can go 6 months. I always go 6 months on all of my listings. When I was in my early 20s, I was taught that you got to take a listing for at least 90 days. And I still remember that first listing appointment I was on, and I'm telling that seller how great I am and how quickly I can sell the property. And I have a 90-day listing, and they said, well, Derf, if you're so great, why do you need 90 days? Can't I just give you a 30-day listing? And I really didn't have an answer. I didn't have a comeback for that objection. So here, I've never had anybody complain about my 6-month listing because they can cancel at any time. And over the years, I always, not recently, but maybe a couple decades ago, I may have had 1 or 2 sellers take advantage of me where they've canceled and gone to another company. But the reality is, when I look at the number of transactions that I was able to get because of this guarantee, it's a hands down winner. I would hope that everybody uses this seller may cancel at any time guarantee. All right, any questions on that? I don't, whatever you want for commissions, whether you're charged 6% or or 5%, just make sure on that page up, Danny, that you put what the cooperating brokerage is, because if there's ever a dispute, this is where everybody's going to look. It's in this original contract that the seller has signed. Okay. You know my opinion on coming soon and not putting stuff on the MLS. You know, to me, there's no reason to represent a seller fairly and ethically without putting it on the MLS. So I'm not even going to go through that. Additional terms, management approval. Everything looks good here. Okay, signs on the bottom. Arbitration agreement. The listing agreements and purchase agreements decades ago all came with an arbitration agreement. Now they've pulled it out and it's a separate one for the listing. It's still part of the purchase agreement. It's so rare that we have problems, and especially if you're offering a guarantee, that this arbitration agreement is not necessary, in my opinion. If we run across a seller that feels that they're not being adequately represented, or you're not doing enough open houses, or whatever the problem is, we're going to cancel the listing. We're not going to sue them for a commission. The problem is that nowadays, just doing a mediation typically runs $15,000 to $20,000 per party for attorney fees. And then you can do the arbitration and spend another $15,000 or $20,000. Plus the time involved in it. It's just not worth it. So we use that guarantee in your presentation. And then you don't have to worry about the arbitration agreement. The seller's advisory, read through this. Again, this is just a notice to the seller on some of the disclosures that we're going to be using. This is just requires a signature at the very end. I'll let you read this on your own. Buyer and seller papers. Obviously, this is the purchase agreement. We're going to skip that. And we're going to get into some of the other seller disclosures that are relatively new in the last 10 to 20 years, right? This possible representation of more than one buyer. This pops up anytime you print out a purchase agreement, and everybody signs this, and it lets the client know that even though we may have an exclusive listing with you, Mr. Seller, that we may be representing the buyer also, or we may be representing other sellers, or we may have two buyers that we're representing for the buyers to sign this that are competing for the same listing. So you can see how attorneys might get upset with an agent representing two buyers for the same property. So this hopefully covers us. Again, the CAR attorney says that we've got to have this form so that we give that disclosure, is that we may be representing more than one party, more than one side in a transaction.
And especially in this market with the office.
Yeah, and as Danny mentioned, when there's these multiple offers right now, a lot of times we may have 2 or 3 TRG agents that have offers on our listings, and which is a dual agency position. So in that case, that form is even more important. Historically, it's not, we don't run into those problems, but these last few years, and hopefully for a few more years, we'll have these multiple offers. Market conditions advisory, again, just read through this on your own. Everybody initials this. Counter offers, we're going to talk about that with the purchase agreement. I'll briefly talk about, just so that you know, let's go back up to the the regular counteroffer. Even with these multiple offers, I'm always telling agents that they should select the best offer, the best agent, the best terms, and counter only that one offer. Don't put out multiple counters to 20 different offers and use that multiple counter form, because in most cases, everybody's going to accept it, especially in this market. And all you're doing is you're just putting everything off for another couple of days where the seller's going to have to make a decision. So make that decision one time, go with the best offer. If they don't respond to you right away, either verbally on the phone that they're going to sign this, or then go to number two and give number two a counter offer. But I never use the multiple counter offers.
The withdrawal offer,
If you got questions, just yell.
withdrawal of offer.
Oh yeah, so another form that's not in our booklet, and we just had an agent do this in TRG. The property had been on the market for almost a week, like 5 days. They had a lot of interest in the property, but they only had one good offer. So they negotiated, they actually came down a little bit on price. And as you know, in this market with these multiple offers, I always tell everybody, you gotta give it a week to at least 5 days to a week to get that information out to everybody. So that everybody has a chance to see this listing and to put in that offer. So the agent that we had, they did a counter offer. They actually came down on their list price. And guess what? As soon as they put that counter offer, they get a full price. Actually, I think it was higher than full price offer with better terms, which amounted to about $50,000, $60,000 difference. So I get the call. It's like, oh my God, we want to take this other offer and we've already signed this counter offer. Well, Zip Forms and the CR attorneys, as you know, yeah, well, I didn't want to put you on the spot, Mary. I'm glad you're joining us. In their infinite wisdom, you can withdraw, and this is basic contract law. Any offer that is made, like if I'm offering to sell my bicycle for $5, and somebody is thinking, oh, they're hemming and hawing about it, say, well, time's up, I don't want to offer it any longer. So anytime anybody makes an offer, that offer can be withdrawn prior to acceptance. So the same thing applies in real estate, but we want to make sure that it's in writing. And so CR actually has a form. It's a withdrawal of offer form. So an offer it could be your original offer or counter offer. A counter offer is still an offer. Anytime there's an offer made, once it's withdrawn, then that offer is void. Anytime an offer is countered, if there's a counter, then that original offer is void. And the way that plays out,
Expires.
well, there's also expiration dates. Yeah, that voids the contract. But if you counter an offer, let's say it's 500, you make an offer for 500,000 and the seller says, oh, no, I want 510. And the buyer says no. The seller can't go back and say, okay, I'll take your 500,000. They can't do that because once that seller said 510,000, that voids the $500,000 offer. Now, obviously in practice, we're going to work that out. We're going to write a new offer and get everybody to accept it at the 500 or whatever the terms are. But basic contract law states that any time that you make an offer or a counter offer, it voids the others. And in Mary's position last week, and Mary, if you're on, wasn't it like a $50,000 difference in that other offer? Can you unmute yourself if you? Yeah, maybe she doesn't have her mic on. Yeah, but I think it was $50,000. So obviously the seller is thrilled, and I'm hoping that's going to close. And Mary's a real hero for getting that extra $50,000 for her client, because the seller had agreed to that lesser amount and actually signed a counteroffer. Okay, so that's my pitch on the counteroffer. Any questions?
Escrow, how many counter offers?
Oh, the number of counteroffers, yeah. So the whole reason that we're doing everything in writing is, guess what? It's to avoid, yeah, it's to avoid litigation, it's to avoid attorneys. So as a CAR keeps changing these forms, they're making it simpler for agents to use. They do not want agents to write anything. You know, usually I start this in my RPA class, I show them that one-page purchase agreement. That's how old I am. I used to use that when I first started in the business and used to have to write in most of the terms. Well, the CAR attorney said, no, you know, all we're good to do is check the boxes. We don't want agents, since we're not attorneys, practicing law, writing any clauses in contracts, writing lengthy addendums. They don't want that to happen. And that's why they try to cover everything in their forms. So if you go back and forth more than 2 times with an offer, a counteroffer, and an offer, rewrite the original offer and get everybody to sign it so that you're going into escrow very cleanly with a document that everybody understands. Because if you have 2 or 3 counter offers and there's an issue on this, the attorneys are going to argue those clauses. Years ago, I was hired as an expert witness. This was back in this Beverly Hills home was the subject property. It sold for $1 million. This was back when $1 million was a lot of money, not when it's about the cheapest thing you can buy now in Torrance. But this was a big property. The listing agent wrote a counteroffer. Back then, the counteroffer had about a dozen lines and filled it up. They wrote something, you know, there's 12 different items on the counteroffer. So as a experienced broker, I'm reading through this. It all made sense to me. I had no problem with it. But these attorneys, they spent 2 days going through that counteroffer, which in today's terms, that would probably be $100,000 in attorney fees, just taking issue with everything that was written in that counteroffer. It's like, well, why did you say this when it's already stated in the purchase agreement? And why did you say this? So if you're going more than 2 counteroffers, please rewrite it. Coach House Escrow, for example, won't even accept it if there's multiple counteroffers. Rewrite it so that everything is clear. And it's actually very easy to do, guys. You know, once you have it done in zip forms, it's 5 minutes to change a couple of terms or add a checkbox and have it printed out, have it sent out by e-signatures. And now you've got a really clean offer that there's not going to be a dispute over any of the issues that came up in that counter. So keep those offers simple and limited, please. Mary?
Hey, can you hear me?
Yes, I got you.
Okay, good. I turned on my mic. I just wanted
Thanks.
to go back just for a minute to tell you that that was a learning lesson for me. I did not know in 17 years there was a withdraw of offer form. I've never used it, never had to use it.
Well, you know, thanks for admitting that. And you know, the reality is, veteran agents, if you're closing 5 or 6 transactions a year now, you're making good money. I mean, you're in those six figures because the prices, the commissions are big and everything. But what's neat about being in my position as a manager is not only am I a working agent and I get to see my own transactions, so I see how this paperwork and these escrows are playing out in the marketing in today's market, but Danny and I, we get to see on a daily basis problems that arise out there in these contracts and in the marketplace. So, you know, use us if you have questions. As I mentioned at every office meeting, you know, we can help you if you're representing a buyer. write that best offer so that it looks really good, because we see offers every day here. Whereas even a veteran agent, maybe only seeing them once a month or once every couple of months. So I'm glad that worked for Mary, and hopefully that's going to close. That's going to close soon.
Yeah, I wanted to say also that Derf is a wealth of knowledge, and I don't call him that often, but when I do, he usually knows I have a serious problem, because it's probably something I haven't dealt with before. And I was riding my bike when I got the call saying, hey, we'd like to submit an offer, and it's going to be 35,000 higher, no commission, no repairs, no credits, no termite. And I was like, oh my gosh, I have a counter out there. I got to call Derf. What can I get out of this? I didn't even know if I could get out of it. And I've never had to get out of a counter before, believe it or not. So
Yeah.
I appreciate the fact that Derf, you're always available. You answer your phone for me on vacation. You call me right back, and you always have my back, and you have the answers. And so I was really thankful. I rode my bike home so fast, never faster in my life, to get that withdrawal of offer out.
Well, thank you for those kind words, Mary. I'm going to have to give you a raise. Good, and I think it worked out. Wasn't it more than $50,000 that the seller is netting?
Oh yeah, for sure. And
Yeah.
we handed him a termite report, and he's fuming and everything, and they're taking it as is. They had an inspection. There's issues wrong, and
Good.
they are taking it as is. So I was very fortunate. I was within 30 minutes of having to sell it at that other price. That's how close it was.
Yeah, and the other thing is that we're lucky that you had an honest agent on that first transaction, because I've had it happen before with other agents where they says, oh, it's already been accepted. I'll send it over to you, and they backdate it prior to that notice of the withdrawal. So
Yeah, I was worried about that, but she told me, I have your counter, but I'm out driving around. I'm not home yet. When I get home, then I'll send it to them. So when she got home, she had in her email a withdrawal of offer, and she called me and she goes, well, what's this? So I don't think she's ever seen it either.
yeah. Well, and that's another bonus, I think, of DocuSign and the e-signatures, is that when you handwrite stuff, it's easy to forge times and dates and everything. But when clients are using, or agents are using e-signature all the time, there's always a time and a date stamp on that. So I prefer that personally, but good. And thank you, Mary. Thanks for sharing. All right, so let's get on to this contingency removal form. We're still having agents that will put 5 days to do the inspections, 14 days for the appraisal, and 17 days for the loan. Those are your three contingencies. Well, as I tried to get the word out, it really doesn't matter what the contingency is. Whatever the last one is, that buyer can back out for any reason and say, oh, I didn't like the interest rates, or I didn't like the loan, if that was the longest contingency. So these agents are just doing busy work and having 3 contingency removals, when I consider I only want one in my file. I want one that has that box 2C mark, where buyer removes all buyer contingencies. So that's the one that you want. So even though a buyer comes along and says, oh, we can get everything, we can get this appraisal, we'll waive the appraisal, we'll do the inspections in 3 days, right? Well, the default on the loan in the RPA is 21 days. So that means that buyer can basically back out anytime during those 21 days and state that he does not like that loan. So you have to tighten up all of your contingency periods. The other thing, the RPA is written 17 for the defaults are 17 for the appraisal, 17 for inspections, and 21 for loan, which to me is crazy that they're different. But the new RPA is, I believe they're all 17 days. So it's all the same time frame. And they all should be the same. So whether it's 5 days, 14 days, or 21 days, they should all be the same, because otherwise we're just doing busy work and it's not protecting anybody. Okay, any questions? As we'll move on. The TDS, you guys, this has been around a long time. The seller basically acknowledges what is working and what is not working. And then on the second page of this, there's a checklist that if they're aware of any of these problems, not that there may be problems, but is the seller aware of any of these problems? And almost everybody puts no on all of these, unless it's in an HOA, because there's a couple questions here about CC&Rs and the homeowners association. But most cases, sellers always say no to all of this. And then on the third page, the agents have to do their diligent inspection and write it into these 2 or 3 lines. Historically, we used to just write, buyers advised to get a professional inspection on the property. But thanks CAR for this AVID, because now we refer to this, and as a broker and a manager, this is what I want in the file, so that the agent has actually gone through the property and has written items that are wrong with the property. So this is about we've had attorneys come and talk 3 hours just on this AVID. So let me give you a couple of tips on this, and use this template for when you are completing these AVIDs. Almost every file that I preview from outside agents, I will have agents write in here that, oh, the house looks really nice, or there's nothing wrong with this room, or no issues found here, or outside is in really good condition. That's not the purpose of this. You never want to give a compliment in this. You just want to state things that are wrong with the property. And furthermore, the example I use, almost every sidewalk has cracks, or every driveway has cracks. So you put, hey, there's cracks in the driveway. You don't say that there's 3 cracks, or that there are ½ inch cracks, or however many cracks there are. We do not want to be an expert in cracks, nor do we want to be an expert in anything else. So you don't want to get any detailed analysis. And this goes on like the black stuff that's on the wall in the bedroom in the corner, right? You don't state that there's mold, or you don't state that there's mildew. And I mean, I really don't know the difference between mold and mildew. And I don't want you to know the difference, and I don't want you to use those words. So just say that there's some black crud over on the wall in the bathroom, or wherever, and let them get their inspections done. Because that's a red flag if you're ever stating something more than what we have to in our real estate career. So again, when we walk through a house, it's important on this AVID that you make a note about something that's in the front yard, that you make a note about something that's in the house, and you make a note about something that's in the backyard. Because if a problem comes up and it gets into a lawsuit, it's going to be a year down the road, and you want to be able to look at this and say, oh yeah, I actually did an inspection. I went through and I noticed that there was rust on the hose bib in the front, or there were cracks in the driveway in the back, or on the garage floor, or there was peeling paint on the fascia on the back of the house, and there was corrosion on the bathroom sink faucet, something to that effect, because that's our job, is that we have to do this walkthrough. We don't go in the attic. We don't look under the house. We're not a specialist in mold or mildew or leaks on the other thing they mentioned, you know, there's a stain on the ceiling. Well, you don't know if that's a water stain or they are popping a champagne cork. So you say that there's a stain in the back bedroom ceiling. You don't try to guess as to where that came from. Let the buyer or let their inspectors check that out. Okay, so this is an important form, this AVID. Again, that's not even a DRE mandated form, but we obviously want that to protect everybody. Lead-based paint. This is a DRE required form. And in all of my years, I've never had a seller disclose that, yeah, you know, there's a lead-based hazard in my house. So it's one of those forms that everybody just kind of signs, and we do because we have to on this. So let's move on. Agents sign also the FERPTA. We actually don't require this anymore since escrow will do this. All escrows have to have that seller sign that FERPTA, so that's not a required form in our closing package. The 14-page statewide advisory. Go ahead. Question? Okay. The statewide advisory, I'll let you read through this on your own. It's 14 pages. You just need initials at the very, I'm sorry, signatures now on the very last page. And that's really, we just want that page 14 in our file. We don't care about all the other filler pages. If you scroll up a little bit, let's go to on this. I like to check out that Megan's Law on. Where is Megan's Law here? There's arbitration. Here it is, page 10 of 14. Okay, so actually both number 7 and number 8 here, these were separate pages that the California legislature said, hey, you know, Megan's Law, this was back when it was a toll-free number before it was on the internet. And we need all agents to have this disclosure. And it was a single one-page disclosure that gave clients the right to make this phone call to check via zip code back then who was on that database. The supplemental property tax bill, number 8 down here, that's another issue that the state said that, oh, agents, you know, we're getting a lot of complaints that people don't know what the supplemental tax bill is. And so you have to have this disclosure. And it was a one-page, it was a separate page disclosure. Well, and that's evolved into what, 2 items out of what, 50 or 60 onto this 14-page thing, which I don't think any of my clients have ever read. And it hasn't resolved any issues about supplemental property tax bills, because I still get those calls when clients receive those.
9
But-
out of 10.
Yeah. But this is the system, and this is so that you guys know how these forms come about is CAR or the state or the legislature mandates them in some form, and then they get demoted to a paragraph out of 50 on this 14 pages. Obviously, there's lots of important stuff there, but I know my clients don't typically read it very well. They can't, because they usually go through all of these papers in about 15 or 20 minutes. Another, and I usually like to close on this Southern Property Questionnaire, probably one of the most important forms, because this specifically asks the seller about different items on their property. If you remember on that TDS, there was like 5 or 6 items. You know, hey, are you aware of anything not working, right? But now we're going to be very specific and ask about all these other issues in this. I think it's 4 pages in this property questionnaire. When this came out about 20 years ago, they said that every one of these questions was a major lawsuit in California. And so the CAR attorneys came up with this to make sure that everybody, all of these sellers would disclose these items. It still gets, it comes back to what the seller thinks is material. And if you look at the very first page of this, that's how the seller is supposed to answer. It's like, if you look at bold under Roman numeral 2, these are representations made by the seller, not the agent, that they think is material. And under Roman numeral 3, they say known material or significant items. So that's pretty subjective in how a seller can answer this. And then the one, if we go back to that pets thing, I always like to use that as an example here. They're asking the seller, have you ever had pets on the property, right? So how do you answer that? You know, in my family house with 3 boys, yeah, we had mice, and we had lizards, and we had hamsters, goldfish, right? Yeah. So do you list all of that? Do you list all of that? Typically, my sellers don't list that. The lawsuit that came onto this was this one house had dogs. I think they were big, like German Shepherds, and they peed on the carpet. They replaced the carpet, but the stains went down into the hardwood floors, and the buyers bought the property because they really wanted these hardwood floors. So the buyer takes the carpet out, and they find these permanent stains where it took a lot of money to patch these, and these were not disclosed by the seller. So, you know, it's kind of a stretch for a lawsuit, but, you know, you don't, it was, and it was a lot of money. So that gets back to the question here, what do you state? And so I, you know, when I'm selling something, I put everything down on this. I disclose as much as possible, but typically my clients do not. And that's where you'll get into these specific questions. There's also one under landscaping there. We gotta go up there. Yeah, landscaping here under H, down. I think it's under landscaping. Oops, making me dizzy here. Anyway, one of them, it says, "Oh, have you ever had any leaks? Any water leaks ever on the property?" Right? Well, everybody's had water leaks. I mean, and then on the landscaping, has any of your trees or plants or vegetation had any diseases or infestations ever? Right? Well, you know, sellers always say no, but mine have definitely had infestations over the years. Any leaks or cracks with any repairs with the sprinklers up there, right? Well, yeah, I mean, I'm messing with my sprinklers probably on a weekly basis. But again, that can be subjective if the seller doesn't think that that's material. Yeah. Another issue on the plumbing is a big lawsuit was the seller. They have trees on their property, and every year they would have to get their drains rotor-rooted. They'd have a plumber come out. They didn't think it was a big deal. It was just something that they always clean these roots out. Well, that was not disclosed, and the buyers come in and say, "Well, you know, that's going to cost us a couple $100 every year. I want to get reimbursed for that." So what could be material for one obviously may not be for the other party. Neighborhood noise. So they get very specific here as to, do you have neighborhood parties? Do you block off the streets? Is there a motorcycle gang that lives next door? Air compressors, generators, underground gas pipelines. Anybody know if they have an underground gas pipeline? Probably everybody does somewhere near their home. but I don't know where it is. So, just be careful when you go through this, if this is for your property. But the reality is that most sellers, nope, don't have any problems. And they go through this and check out no on all this. Questions on this SBQ?
Another one is any reports.
Oh, okay, thank you, Danny. On reports down here, because I still get questions. I would say probably once a month, Danny and I will get a question. It's like, hey, we got a termite report. I'm representing the seller. They got a termite report about a year ago. Do we have to show that? Or, we got an appraisal on the property, or, they did an inspection and they got a bid for windows, or they got a bid for a new roof, but it was 10 years ago, right? Well, it says any reports on the property, now in the past, or even in the future, proposed, if they're giving just estimates, those all have to be turned over, whether oral or in writing. Now, I don't know how they're going to prove whether something was said orally to you, but so what this does is it puts that seller on notice that any reports, any estimates, any work done has to be disclosed to this buyer. Obviously, if they bought the house 30 years ago and there was an inspection report done, then I don't know how material that would be now, but there's no time limit on this question here that they're asking. All right, so let's finish this up so I can get you guys out of here. I'm getting hungry. Everybody signs that they've received this booklet, and again, that can be sent out via email to your clients. They also do this hazard report, and again, this is actually a very easy report because the client can go down and just say, hey, I don't know anything about this because I didn't read the book and I'm not going to read it, and that's fine, but that's a form that we have to have. I use this ETA extension because this is a good kind of catch-all form that I don't see many agents using this, and this can be used if you're extending the escrow period, if you're extending any of the time frames. A lot of times we have a 1 week thing, but we couldn't get in the property, we need a couple more days. So you don't want to get outside of your time frames that's in the contract. Use this ETA form, extension time addendum, and extend those time periods. Keep it in your under contracted time. And you can use this for escrow. You can use it actually to extend leases. Any time that you're extending anything, it's a good catch-all form. Use it.
Except for the listing, the modification of terms.
Oh, you can't use it. Well, I've actually used this for a listing agreement. Why can't you use this?
I
I don't think it has a box to check off. Oh, I guess you can put other. You can put other.
Hey, I would write an other. I mean, it's in writing. If you put other and you put listing agreement in there and you say, hey, I'm extending it for 30 days.
That's true.
I'm good with that. You've got it in writing. Obviously, the modification in terms is the one Sierra wants us to use, but I'm okay with this ETA. We'll see what Lauren says. Requests for repairs. And I fight with agents all the time on this. It's worth 2 minutes for me to talk about this. When you're dealing with buyers, especially in this market, don't tell your buyers, oh, we can always go back and ask them to fix things or ask for credits. Because when you get me as the listing agent, I tell you, hey, you wrote this contract as is. They picked you over everybody else because of these terms, right? And now you're coming back and you're saying that you want $10,000 or you want the roof repaired or you want this fixed. No, you can cancel the agreement and we can go to buyer number 2, but I don't want you coming to me and asking for work to be done when it's on an as-is basis. And unfortunately, almost all agents do this. And I have a lot of sellers that will, say, okay, we'll give you the money, and it perturbs me because the contract states that the seller does not even have to respond. It's item 14 in the RPA, that they don't even have to respond to a request for repairs. And what happens is when the buyer agent tells their buyer, oh, we can ask for this, well, they're expecting a response. And I just got in an argument with his agent on a transaction I'm doing now, where the agent says, oh, Derf, you got to respond because they don't think that you presented it. They want 3,000. They want 3,000. We're talking about an $800,000 property. They want a $3,000 credit because the house is. And I go, yeah, the house is terrible. It's in terrible condition. We got 25 offers. The seller's not going to give you $3,000, and they're not going to respond to you because that's what I'm going to advise them to do, and that's what it says in the contract. And so then he questions my ethics and says, oh, well, how do I know that we were going to present it to him and everything? So at that point, I got pissed. I shut up. I talked to Danny. I went back to my seller. We responded with seller does not agree to any of the buyer's requests, and we sent them the notice to buyer to perform along with the cancellation of contract. So that basically put the buyer, because we were at the end of the time frames, the 2 days. But it just upsets me that we have to go and renegotiate these contracts. And it's usually because the buyer's agent is telling the buyer, and the buyer then gets upset, and then it becomes a principal thing. And we've had buyers back out over a couple $1,000s. Well, the buyers are already into it a couple of weeks. They're into it for an appraisal fee. They're into it for inspection fees. So, when you're spending $1 million on a property and they want $5,000, I just think that's really foolish. They either buy the property or they don't. That's my opinion on this. And I'll get off my box. And if there's any questions, let's move on. So try not to use that request for repairs, please.
And then they do the bottom with the CR form, which is the next form. We don't have that in this list.
Yeah, we used the
CR
CR.
removal form.
Yeah, we did the CR form already.
Well, on that, Derf, though,
Yes.
on an inspection, sometimes you discover something.
Yes, and that's the whole purpose of the inspections, because there could be undisclosed stuff. And I've had joists in the roof that have been damaged, and it's $10,000, or foundation problems, which could be $20,000, $30,000. So that gives the buyer the right, obviously, to back out and says, hey, I don't want to get into this because it's $30,000. Then a good listing agent will try to negotiate and try to work around that. But when they use that for, and I'm still seeing it, these inspection reports, they always have 27, count them. There's always 27 items that are checked off that need to be fixed on these old houses. And I still see buyers agents submitting that checklist from the inspection and say, oh, we want the seller to fix all these things, right? Or, give us $10,000 or $20,000, Well, when that happens to me, that's when I send them my cancellations and notice to perform, and we're moving on. And we just did one the other day, or an agent, we just did the cancellation, sent it all over. The agent says, okay, I'll accept it as is. Right. So, they're just trying to negotiate after they were able to get this property above the other 20 buyers that wanted it, and they don't want to go back into that marketplace. So again, the problem I see in this is it's the buyer's agents are not educating that buyer so that buyer realizes that you can ask for the moon, but the seller doesn't even have to respond to you. Okay, let's move on. The wire fraud, read that, sign that. We've combined the carbon monoxide, the smoke detectors, everything into one form here. This is the only one that's needed. We don't require the old smoke detector form, just that form. And then lastly, this VP, the verification property condition. Lauren doesn't even require the seller to sign it. We just need to have the buyer sign it and state that everything is okay. They can also check that box right above their name there if it's like a vacant house and the buyer may have been in it, a dozen times during the escrow, so they could waive their right to that final inspection. It's important for the buyer, though, to go through the property, make sure that it's the same as it is when they first went through, that there's no additional damage. If there is damage, they need to write those notes in here so that it can be handled after close of escrow if need be. Okay. All right, so I'll hang on here for 30 seconds if there's any questions on any of these forms. Otherwise, I'm in the office. Give me a call. Glad to help you out on all of these. Please use my templates. Thank you, guys. Make it a great day.
Thank you.
This entire week, starting on Tuesday with the verdict, the conviction of Derek Chauvin, the murder conviction of Derek Chauvin, who is now in a state